Mr. President, I come today to speak out in opposition of this misguided effort to overturn the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's arbitration rule, which protects the rights of consumers and protects our brave service members and veterans from being taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial institutions. It was only a couple weeks ago that we had the CEO of Equifax up here on Capitol Hill testifying about how his company had failed to protect Americans' private financial information and had put more than 140 million consumers at risk of fraud or worse. And that wasn't too long after we had the CEO of Wells Fargo here testifying about how his company had defrauded millions of consumers by forcing them into accounts and fees they never signed up for and certainly did not agree to. The American people were outraged by these scandals, and with good reason. Both of these companies had committed serious wrongdoings, and they admitted it. But that still didn't stop either from trying to shield themselves from the legal liability their own actions had risked. Both of these companies tried to prevent the people they had taken advantage of from holding them accountable in court by using what is known as forced arbitration clauses. They thought, and it seems they were right, that if they could stop people from suing them for their wrongdoing and instead force them into private arbitration that heavily favors mega businesses at the expense of consumers, they'd have a better shot at saving money for their company. They didn't care about consumer rights or even justice. They just wanted to make as much money as they could, legally or illegally, and then get out of Dodge as cleanly as possible. But because the American people were so outraged by these scandals, we noticed what they were trying to do. The actions of both companies caused an uproar that ultimately led them to back down and ensure American consumers didn't have to give up their right to a day in court just for doing business with these companies. Those sorts of forced arbitration clauses were exactly what the CFPB was trying to stop when it implemented the rule my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are trying to repeal tonight. Wells Fargo and Equifax's attempts to force consumers into mandatory arbitration clauses should have been a lesson, but I guess those working to reverse this rule here tonight didn't learn it. It's common to hear stories throughout my state of Illinois and throughout the military community of service members being taken advantage of through predatory loans, scams, abuses, and fraud. That's because active duty service members are particularly vulnerable consumers, especially when they are deployed. They get a guaranteed paycheck, but they also have limited time to read their credit card statements and keep up with security breaches to see if their identities have been stolen. They're too busy carrying out the mission. Service members are also frequently on the move between deployments and base relocations, often separated from their spouses and their families for long periods of time. Despite that, they still need to wire money when emergencies happen, they still need to pay bills, and their focus isn't always on whether a loan they took out has hidden fees or if a company is charging them a higher rate than they're supposed to. What they are focused on, and rightly so, is carrying out their mission, often in places like Afghanistan. Corporations and scam artists know this, and they take advantage of it. The CFPB's forced arbitration rule could help protect our service members from this sort of abuse. But it seems that a few of my colleagues want to make it harder for military families to get by, and that's a shame. Abusive corporate practices left unchecked not only causes incredible financial difficulty for service members and their families, but also has national security implications, directly impacting military readiness. In the military, bad credit can affect your security clearance and advancement. When the DoD loses qualified service members because of financial instability, they also lose mission capability and the significant investments made in that person's training. This is an expensive loss. DoD estimates that each separation from service costs taxpayers more than $57,000. Corporate abuse also causes personal difficulties. When someone is deployed, the last thing they should have to worry about is whether their house is going to be foreclosed on or their car is going to be repossessed because they were a victim of a scam. When they're going into battle or heading out on a mission, the last thing our troops should be thinking about is how a company took advantage of the fact that they were out of the country and how there's so very little they can do about it. Unfortunately, this isn't a hypothetical issue. Service members get taken advantage of all the time, and we have seen countless times how their ability to file lawsuits holds bad actors accountable. Not too long ago, the banks Santander and Wells Fargo paid tens of millions to resolve lawsuits that were filed because they were illegally repossessing service members' cars. JP Morgan Chase paid $27 million to settle a lawsuit from service members who were being overcharged for mortgages. And student loan servicer Navient paid 78,000 service members $60 million after overcharging them on their student loans. In each of these instances, service members, sometimes with the help of government, filed a lawsuit to get relief and hold these financial actors accountable. But when companies force our service members or any consumer into arbitration, military families lose the right to hold wrongdoers accountable. That's what happened to Archie Hudson, a disabled veteran, father of two, and husband from Waynesboro, Mississippi. A few years ago, Archie requested a loan from Wells Fargo to replace his home's windows. Instead, he received a Wells Fargo credit card, along with sky-high interest rates and a forced arbitration clause hidden in the fine print. He didn't realize it at the time, like the millions of other Wells Fargos that Wells Fargo scammed, but it ultimately helped to ruin his credit. When Archie tried to get his day in court, he was instead forced into an arbitration proceeding that favors lenders over consumers. And he's not alone. The vast majority of people who have been forced into arbitration could tell you that the system is rigged. When the CFPB first looked into this issue, they found that when consumers file an arbitration claim against a company that takes advantage of them, they have to pay an average of $161 in filing fees, and they almost always lose. Companies, on the other hand, won a whopping 91% of the time that they go into arbitration against consumers. On average, the consumer then had to pay $7,725 in damages to further pad corporate profits. Banks sometimes try to defend these clauses by saying the reduced legal liability helps them reduce costs for consumers, but there's absolutely no evidence that that is true. In fact, when companies have added these forced arbitration clauses in the past, the evidence suggests that they never reduce costs for consumers. These clauses simply mean bigger profit margins for those banks that break the law. There's a reason that so many military veteran service organizations like the American Legion, the Air Force Association, the Marine Corps League, the National Guard Association, the Vietnam Veterans of America, and groups like the AARP oppose this effort. Remember, arbitration isn't about saving lawyers' fees or decreasing costs to consumers. It's there to protect the interests of banks over consumers. Look, I'm not naive. I get that companies, especially banks, are in the business of making money. It makes sense that they would want to force all their customers into arbitration because that saves them money. But why on earth would my colleagues here in the Senate go along and help them rob service members and consumers of their rights to go to court? Why would we allow bad actors to get off scot-free? If they believe that our service members are unfairly getting rich off suing companies that wrong them, then they should say that. If they believe companies that break the law should be shielded from having to answer for their illegal actions in court, then they should say that. But we shouldn't let them hide behind cutting regulations. I'm all for cutting needless red tape, but the arbitration rule is an example of a regulation that actually helps Americans. It helps our service members and our military families. A vote to overturn the arbitration rule is a vote against our military and against those who wake up every single day to serve and protect the greatest nation on the face of the earth. Thank you, and I yield back.